Shalom Chaverim. Today, Parashat Shlach, Torah portion of Shlach, and we're going to do it together with who is probably one of my favorite thinkers of all time, Professor Yeshayahu Leibowitz, and that you can see here in the picture in this book. And this book is called רציתי לשאול אותך, Professor Leibowitz, which means I wanted to ask you, Professor Leibowitz. And it is actually a collection of letters that were sent to Leibowitz with questions and his answers to those letters, and some letters that he sent in rage to some places. And it's important to note that Leibowitz never actually sat down to write a book of philosophy that really organizes his philosophical method or system. All of his philosophy we know from essays and articles and letters, lots of letters, a letter exchange that he had, and so this book collects a lot of them, and it's a great book to have. So I want to read to you a segment from a letter that he wrote as an answer in 1966. And it goes like this. I will try to address the very concept of morality. This concept does not refer to actions, but to desires and intentions. Each act in and of itself is morally indifferent. Come and see. In two cases, a person pulls the trigger of a loaded and cocked rifle with another person at the target. And in both cases, the other person is killed in what appears to be the same act twice. And yet, in one case we say vile murder, and in the other case, a heroic act by a soldier defending the homeland. This means that it is not the act, but the intention, and the intention of the doer of the act that determines moral judgment. The theory of morality or ethics is not the theory of correct behavior, but the theory of correct will. All right, so what Leibowitz says here is that when we approach ethics, when we approach moral judgments, we can never judge acts. Because, and he gives the example, in a case where a person squeezes a trigger to kill another person, right? We can have, two similar acts of a person kills another person, but in one act, we would look at it and say this is a heinous crime or murder, and another with exact same act, we would say this is a heroic act because it was done by a soldier in a war defending a country. Right? So Leibowitz would say the act is identical. What we need to judge is the intention. However, that brings a way more complicated question, which is, so who or what determines which intention is right and which intention is wrong? And which intention we should judge and which intention we shouldn't. And so we'll get back to that, but first a few words about Leibowitz. So Leibowitz was a 20th century man. He was born in 1903, died in 1994. He was born in Riga, and he was the brother of Nechama Leibowitz, the legendary Torah commentator. And as a young man, he was already stood out for his brilliance, and he finished his first doctorate at the age of 21, and then proceeded to do another doctorate that he received in the age of 26. And then in the 30s, he immigrated to the land of Israel, back then mandatory Palestine, and very quickly became one of the most distinguished professors in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And Leibowitz was legendary for many reasons, and still a very legendary character in Israel, but mainly he stood out because he was a man of contradictions. He was an Orthodox Jew, basically observing Torah and mitzvot, but at the same time he was a scientist, he was a neuroscientist, and that fascinated a lot of people who approached him with questions about the tension between science and faith, or science and religion, and actually he has a whole book, which is also a collection of essays that is called Science and Values. So that was one of the contradictions. He also was a big critic. He really criticized Orthodox Judaism, even though he was observant, and in many ways was a big advocate of human rights, of women's rights, of LGBTQ rights, and this was in a time when it wasn't really still a part of the conversation. He was also a big leftist, especially when it came to his opinions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and he was really in a great opposition to the occupation, criticized a lot of the conduct of the Israeli army and the Israeli government, and not without many controversies that followed him throughout his life, so much so that the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin refused to attend a ceremony of the Israel Award, which is the highest award in Israel, should Leibowitz would be honored with it. So you can see why he is very well known and spoke of, and there has been a revival of Leibowitz in late years, especially with all the turmoil in Israel and the political turmoil, and his philosophy and his criticism has surfaced yet again, and you can see in protests people holding signs saying Leibowitz Tzadak, which means Leibowitz was right. So there is kind of like a resurgence of Leibowitz philosophy today. Okay, so let's get back to the big question that Leibowitz puts in front of us. So if we judge the intention and not the act, right? So who or what determines which intention is right and which intention is wrong? So Leibowitz basically tells us that there were, throughout the history of philosophy, two answers to this question. Answer number one comes from Greek philosophy, or from Socrates, all the way through Stoicism, which says that moral judgment should come from the environment, or as they put it, from the truth in reality. What does it mean? It means that a person should determine what's right or wrong according to their environment's moral conduct, okay? So whatever your tribe deems right or wrong is how you should behave, whatever your village determines, or your kingdom, or your God, right? So it comes from an external rule, or the truth in reality. Centuries later, and this is Leibowitz explains it, centuries later, Immanuel Kant will come and completely flip it and would say, no, it's exactly the opposite. Moral judgment should come from you, from us, from within, right? It is us who are supposed, and not supposed, it's a duty for us to make a moral judgment, not based on our environment, but based on core principles, his categorical imperative, that, if we think of those sets of principles, we can determine if an intention is morally correct, okay? So for example, one of the principles should be, you shall always treat people as ends and not means, right? So when you come to determine if something is morally right or not, this is what you should ask yourself. But you are the one making the moral judgment and not your environment. And so Leibowitz comes and says, they're both wrong. At least according to Judaism, both Socrates and Kant are wrong. And the proof is in our portion, in Shlach. So, to refresh your memories about Parashat Shlach, the portion of Shlach, it's a very dramatic portion. It's the portion in which it tells the story of the 12 spies. So 12 spies, 12 representatives from each tribe were called by Moses and were told to go scout the land of Israel before the Israelites will come in to inhabit it. And those 12 spies went in and toured the country for 40 days. And when they came back, they reported that the land is a land of milk and honey. It's abundant with so many things. However, 10 of the 12 spies reported that the locals there are too strong to defeat in war. And they actually described them as giants. Whereas 2 spies, Caleb and Joshua, said, yes, the locals are strong, but they can be defeated with the help of God. The Israelites in turn heard that report and, of course, took to heart the account of the 10 spies and were terrified of the idea of entering the land. And once again, as we see a lot in the Torah, they completely neglected their faith in God's care and supervision. So they were punished, and they were punished severely. That entire generation would not enter the promised land, but rather dwell in the desert for 40 years, right? 40 years against the 40 days maybe that they were in, and it would only be their children, their next generation, that will get to enter. But after this ordeal of the 12 spies, suddenly comes the following verse. דבר על בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם ונתנו על ציצית הכנף פתיל תכלת. Suddenly comes the commandment to wear tzitzit, to wear it says, tell the Israelites, put fringes on the edges of your garments for generations, right? And this commandment to put the tzitzit that we still practice today is so important that it made it to the Shema in our prayer, right? So twice a day, during the morning service and the evening service, after the Shema, we say what is called Parshah Tzitzit. We actually recite this commandment from Shlach to put on the tzitzit. So why that commandment to put the tzitzit was so important that it joined the Shema and we say it twice a day? So the Talmud in Menachot says this, וראיתם אותו וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני, שקולה מצווה זו כנגד כל המצוות כולם. Our sages says the commandment to put the tzitzit equivalent to all of the commandments in their entirety, right? That's a very, very strong statement. And they explain this very strong statement. They say, וראיתם אותו וזכרתם ועשיתם, ראייה מביאה לידי זכירה, זכירה מביאה לידי עשייה. Okay, so what they're saying here is that this teaches that looking at the ritual fringes leads to remembering the mitzvot, and remembering them leads to doing them. Okay, so again, why is the commandment to put the tzitzit equal all of the other commandments? Is because this commandment will remind us to do all of the other commandments. It's that simple. And in our portion, right after the commandment to do to put the tzitzit, there's a beautiful explanation. And now I'm getting to the proof of Leibowitz of why Kant and Socrates were wrong. So listen carefully. So the Torah says, והיה לכם לציצית, וראיתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני, ועשיתם אותם, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם, ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם. Okay? And it translates to, that shall be your fringe. Look at it and recall all God's commandments and observe them so that you do not follow your heart and eyes in your urge to stray. And now I'm going to read to you directly from Leibowitz, talking about this verse and explaining his theory. However, in the Shema, this is Leibowitz. However, in the Shema it is said, and you shall not follow your heart and your eyes. You shall not follow your heart is the negation of Kant's principle. You shall not follow your eyes is the negation of Socrates' principle. The reasoning for these two negations is given immediately afterwards. I am the Lord your God. The moral decision according to each of the two possible approaches is a decision according to the consciousness and emotion of the person. Therefore, it involves work in which the person works himself. And this is the opposite of the religious decision, which means the work of God. All right, so let me explain. So, lo taturu achar einechem, you shall not follow your eyes, is Socrates' idea of basically judging right and wrong based on your environment, based on what you see, right? Lo taturu achar levavchem, you should not follow your heart, is Kant's principle. You should not make a moral judgment based on your heart, based on yourself, based on your moral judgment. So then what is left? So Leibowitz would tell us, look at how the verse ends. Ani Adonai Elohechem. Moral judgment only comes from something that is external to this reality, from the transcendental. And if you think about it, outsourcing moral judgment to the transcendental is not a bad solution. Because no matter how you flip it, and no matter if you go according to Kant or Socrates, what you and I deem morally right could be for someone else or for another culture morally wrong, and another way around. And there's no way to compromise it. What you are left with is what we call relativism. Or to each their own. And so the only way out of it is to get outside of reality, of our environment and ourselves. And that is a moral decision to make, according to Leibowitz. And the tzitzit is important because the tzitzit is with us to remind us not to trust our eyes and not to trust our hearts, but to only trust God. And this is why we wear it. And I have to tell you that unfortunately, throughout my upbringing in Israel and also here in the United States, as I'm involved in the Jewish world, I see a lot of people with tzitzit poke out of their shirts. I see a lot of people wearing kippahs, a lot of people that put tefillin daily, and all of those ritual garments do nothing to make them behave in what I think is a moral way. And in some cases, the exact opposite. They act in opposition to God's way, to God's mitzvot, even though wearing them. So I just wanted to say this because those reminders don't always remind. And I really want to encourage all of us this Shabbat to no matter what it is, if we find ourselves reminders, to really pay attention to them. And to conclude, I wanted to just ask one more question. So why, what's the connection of the tzitzit? Why is the tzitzit commandment comes right after the ordeal of the spies? Well, it comes from the word taturu. So basically, when Moses sends the spies, latur et haaretz, to scout the land, it's basically to follow the path of the land. It's the same word as lo taturu achar levavchem v'achar einechem. You should not follow the path of your eyes and your heart. And it thematically fits as well because you know what happened to the spies. It's just like Socrates and Kant. They followed their hearts and their eyes, and unfortunately they had nothing to remind them of God. Shabbat Shalom.